Good afternoon, everyone. I am so glad that y'all have joined us this Tuesday. We appreciate you joining us for today's webinar, Telling Your Story. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we can go ahead and do introductions and get things started here. Wonderful. Again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wilman A. Christian III. I am the Director of PRISM and Workforce Equity at the USC Racial and Equity Center. As you know, PRISM is a racial equity platform that our center created over 2 years ago to assist professionals of color advance or begin their career in higher education. It is also a tool for colleges and universities to recruit people of color and create greater equity in their campus workforce. We want to submit your questions through the chat today as we go throughout today's webinar. We'll be answering these questions throughout and also towards the end of the presentation. So just as folks let me know that they could hear the audio visuals and access them, okay, please do so in the chat box. If you have questions, if anything needs clarification, please do so, as we'll be sure to answer your questions throughout and also towards the end of today's presentation. Our team today is joined by Next Generation, which is a higher education executive search, management, and information technology consulting firm. Over the past summer, as the nation again grappled with racial equity issues related to the murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, both of our organizations recognized that there was more we could do to advance racial equity in our respective spheres of influence. It's in this spirit that our two organizations formed a strategic partnership to advance racial equity in the higher education workforce. Today, we bring you the first of these efforts. And with that, I want to introduce our two teams here. From the Next Generation team, we have Mary Beth Baker and Phil Goldstein. Both of them are managing partners at Next Generation Leadership. They have over 25 years each working in higher education as management consulting and executive recruiters. They have expertise working with institutions on executive search, organizational effectiveness, and technology strategies. We're also joined today by Diana Sadluskas. She is an executive coach and management consultant at Sadluskas Consulting Services. She also has over 25 years in higher education. She has expertise in guiding clients to expand executive presence and succeed in career development activities. From the USC Race and Equity team, we have Laura Aposhian, who is the Director of Marketing at the USC Race and Equity Center. She's been working in higher ed for over 3 years, and she's come to us from the technology industry. Her expertise is in marketing and design. We're also joined today by Brenda Junius from the USC Race and Equity Center team. She is the Director of Corporate Relationships, and she's been working in higher ed for 8+ years. She has expertise in workforce equity and diversity, budgeting for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and creating smart strategic goals for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I mentioned who I am earlier. Again, Wilman A. Christian, the Director of PRISM and Workforce Equity at the USC Race and Equity Center. And I've been working in higher ed for 10+ years. So I just want to give you a bit of background as to why we're here today. We're hosting this webinar to assist folks in learning about how to better articulate the assets that we bring as professionals. Convincingly and clearly telling others who we are, what we're about professionally, and where we see ourselves going is helpful to our career development. And I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to Phil as he'll take us on next steps.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Wilman, and good afternoon, everyone. Before we start to talk with you about how to tell your story, I thought I'd take a couple of minutes just to reflect on why it's important to be able to tell your story. And in our capacity as executive recruiters, we get to have hundreds of conversations each year with individuals. And sometimes those are around networking events. Sometimes those are informational interviews. Sometimes those are screening interviews. Sometimes it's when we're sitting with our clients in an institution going through their interviews of candidates or seeing candidates go through that inevitable day of 7 or 8 interviews that you will go through when you're in a job search. And inevitably, all of those conversations usually start with some variation on the question of, tell me something about yourself, where the candidate's asked to introduce themselves or literally gets the question of, before we get into our detailed questions, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? And often that's a missed opportunity for candidates that we see people uh, answer that question in a somewhat perfunctory way. They may just take a minute and just define their current job, or they may take too much time and just kind of walk through their entire resume and try to re-articulate all of the jobs that they've had. And if you really think about it, whether you're career networking or you're in a job search, you have to think about yourself as the product, and the story that you tell is really the advertisement that it wants to entice people to learn more. And so sometimes the best ways that we see individuals handle that "tell me a little bit about yourself" question is by really realizing that it's a first impression where they get to let us know, or let the people interviewing them know, what's really different about their experience. What's that consistent thread that runs through the different positions they've had in their career that really tell us something about them and the qualifications they're bringing to a particular opportunity, and makes us want to learn more. I think the best introductions are ones where you realize that the person listening to you probably already has your resume in front of them. They're familiar with the jobs that you've undertaken, and you use that as an opportunity to tell us something maybe that we didn't read in your resume, and we are able to, from that, gain a better sense of your strengths. Or it's a chance, if you are in a job search and not a networking situation, to be able to really talk about what is it about you and your experience and your interests that align well with the job that you're interviewing for. How does this fit into your career goal? Why is this next role a natural progression in the series of roles you've held in your career? And maybe you're not the assistant director of financial aid and you're applying for the director of financial aid position, but you've got experience in your career in finance and student services and in bringing people together to use data to make decisions. Well, that's an opportunity for you to shape impressions and tell that story and be able to overcome any misperceptions people might have about your readiness and alignment with a particular position, just because you're not following a career progression that they may be predisposed to assume that you would be following. So being able to convey your interest and alignment with a particular job that you're pursuing is as important also as using the introduction to create that first impression. The third is it's really an opportunity to demonstrate how you communicate and how you persuade. And that introductory minute or two that you spend answering that question of "tell me a little bit about yourself" is also a first test you in some ways are being given about your communication skills. Are you coming across as succinct? Are you able to craft a very well-structured response to that question that conveys confidence in the people listening to you, that you are well prepared for that meeting, that role that you're pursuing, that interaction? Are your examples at the right level of detail for the type of role that you're pursuing? If it's a highly technical role where you have to establish your particular expertise in an area, are you doing that? If it's a senior leadership role, are you staying at a fairly strategic level in how you're explaining yourself? Or are you getting lost in the details and the weeds of your story and you start to unravel confidence? And are you compelling? Are you sharing something that is interesting about your experience and your passion and your goals in your career, where again, you've got your audience now kind of hooked and leaning forward and wanting to hear more? And I think when you put all of that together and think about it ahead of time, you're able to convert it from an opportunity which may feel perfunctory at first of, well, why don't you tell us a little about yourself, to the beginnings of an opportunity to really get conveyed to the people who are listening to you, who you are, what you're about, and why they should want to learn more. So that's, as we start this conversation about how to tell your story, why it's important to have a story, whether you're interviewing right now for a position, or you're earlier in a job searching strategy and you're just networking, or you just want to be, ready to be able to meet people and build out your professional network. So that's why you need a story. And Brandy, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can kind of take the next section of our talk.
Thanks so much, Phil. And Phil made a really good point that when you're thinking about telling your story, you want to make sure that you're telling folks what they don't already see in your resume. And so this is a really good opportunity to make sure that you highlight your full identity. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can structure your story using your identity as an asset. And we'll go into some definitions of identity and that sort of thing here in a minute. But I wanted to talk about why it's important to highlight your diversity as an asset. And really, one, it creates more opportunities for you. You can pull in transferable skills that if you hadn't brought up other experiences that you had, or if you hadn't, brought up things that you do in your spare time or things that make you truly unique, you wouldn't have an opportunity to communicate some of those transferable skills. And it allows you to bring in your full scope of your experiences and convey what's really important to you and what you really value. And I think this is important because a lot of times when we think about coming into a new workplace, we think that it's important to kind of assimilate and become similar to everybody else that's in the workplace. And what the research tells us is there's actually not very much value in having a workplace where everybody is exactly the same, thinks the same, looks the same, has the same set of experiences, has the same background, comes from the same place. We really get a lot of value in our workplaces when we have diversity and people have different thoughts and opinions and ideas and experiences that they bring with them. So we really encourage folks to bring their full selves with them as they craft their story. And they have these, quick elevator pitches, or if someone's asking them, share a little bit about themselves, that they don't shrink away from sharing the parts about them that make them unique and diverse, that they really highlight those things as assets. The other thing about that is it creates more opportunities for others as well. So for example, if I wear my hair naturally, I wear my hair naturally curly. If I wear my hair naturally to work and others are able to see that I do well in my job, I'm, on top of things, I create a pathway for other people to come in and be authentic and whether it's wearing their hair natural or doing something else that's authentic to them without the same stigma that people might project or expect to come from somebody doing something like that. And so it also creates a more authentic and welcoming work environment where people are able to bring their full selves. And that creates space for people to really dig deeper and engage more. And when people are in those mind states, they're more productive and they're able to better contribute. So again, these are some of the reasons why we think it's important to bring your full self to work and why it's important to incorporate these aspects and components of your identity as you are telling your story and crafting that. So I want to go over a couple of definitions really quickly as we get into this. And Diana's going to go a lot more into how to use these aspects and components as you're telling your story, but I really just want to frame why it's important to think about these things in this particular way. So identity is a distinguishing characteristic of an individual. You may have multiple identities. You may think about your identity in terms of your gender or your sex, your race, religion. Some people think about it in terms of ability level, socioeconomic status, education level, and so forth. So these are just characteristics about you that form your identity. Your salient identity is the identity that comes into play in specific situations. And so I'll give an example. If I'm doing a phone interview for a job, my race may not be salient on the phone because you can't see me. But then if you meet me in person, my race then becomes more salient as I interact with the interviewer. And what we see now a lot more is a lot of HR folks are doing things like scrubbing names from resumes when they're evaluating candidates for a particular position, because they acknowledge that sometimes implicit biases creep in when certain identities become salient, and they really want to guard against that. So they'll take names off of resumes because sometimes names can make race salient if it's an ethnic sounding name, or it makes gender salient. And so one of those things that we do in HR to try to combat some of those implicit biases is we take those things away, because we understand that different identities as they play out in certain situations can have an advantage or a disadvantage depending on the person's biases that they might hold. Intersectionality is a theoretical framework that we use to understand how multiple identities come together to form a unique situation that can create unique modes of either discrimination or privilege. And just as a reminder, privilege is just an unearned advantage that somebody gets. It doesn't make them bad that they have a privilege, or it's not something that somebody should be villainized for, but we all have different privileges, and different components of our identity come together to either create more or less privilege. So if I look at intersectionality as an example, I might have an able-bodied man and an able-bodied woman. And we might say that both of those people share a privilege of being able-bodied. But then if you look at intersectionality, we might acknowledge that the man has certain privileges that the woman doesn't have in that situation. So that's a way to understand how intersectionality works. And I bring all of this up to say that you should be thinking about all of these different things as you tell your story. And what I'll show you how to do here in a moment is take different parts of your identity that you may view to be marginalized, or you may think about as things you might not share in a job interview, and reframe them from an asset-minded framework or approach rather than from a deficit-minded approach. And so I just wanted you to have these definitions as you think about how you can do that with your own identities and intersectionalities. So a part of your pre-read that you received, and there's a link in the chat for it, for those of you who didn't have an opportunity to look at it before the session today, we have kind of a little information about a fictional colleague named Teresa Sanchez. And I'll go through this with you all in a minute, but one activity I want to do with you as we're thinking about how we can frame our identity and our diversity as an asset when we're doing a job interview or we're telling our story, we're going to use Teresa as an example of how to do that. So she's a 35-year-old woman who was born in Puerto Rico and moved to the States when she was 5. English is her second language. She has a bachelor's in biological science with an advanced degree in marine biology from a well-known university. She's applying for a department chair position at her current university where she earned her graduate degree, and she's been working there since she graduated. She took 5 years off from both school and work between undergrad and grad school to have her 2 children. And in her spare time, she's a muralist who works with community-based organizations to create identity-themed art that uplifts Latinx youth. So this is just kind of a little bit about our fictional friend Teresa here. And so what I want to do here is I've highlighted some different components. And so I just want to go through the process with you of how we can reframe these things and really highlight them as assets as if we were Teresa telling our story. So the first thing I want to make mention of is she was born in Puerto Rico and moved to the US. I think sometimes people are shy to talk about their background if they come from a different country, again, because we have this mindset that, you know, assimilation and showing that you're the same is a good strategy to make sure that people don't other you. But I think if we reframe it, we see that Teresa has had experience living in different countries, and that gives her a different background that might lend itself to having prepared her to be more successful. This in combination with English being Teresa's second language here, we see that that part of her identity is an asset. She can communicate with people in both English and Spanish, whereas somebody who didn't have that same experience may only be able to communicate in English, or they may not be as fluent. She has experience dealing with people in different communities and in different places. And so again, these skills are transferable. So this isn't something that she should shrink away from or shy away from or feel, you know, isn't a valid point to bring up if she's sharing something about herself. It's just important for her to reframe it in a way to help the interviewer understand how this is really a dynamic part of who she is and what she brings to the workforce, and how that can really be a great asset. Another thing that we'll pull out here is that Teresa took 5 years off from school and work between undergrad and grad school to have her children. I used to work in admissions for a number of years, and one of the things that we would tell our applicants to do is to explain any gaps that you have in your educational history. And it's really important because I think kind of the default is to assume that if a person took a long stretch of time off from school or work, that maybe something bad happened, or maybe, you know, they were confused about their path, or something where they weren't being as productive. I think sometimes that's the default assumption there. But Teresa can take this as an opportunity to really highlight some of her planning skills, that she can say, you know, she strategically took this time off to have children so that she could fully dedicate and devote herself to being a mom while her children are young. And that shows planning skills, it shows strategic thinking, and it also shows that she's a mother. I think sometimes, particularly with women and with moms, one of the things that we want to make sure that our employer understands is that, yes, I'm a mom, yes, I'm a parent, but I'm fully dedicated to my job. Please don't hold that against me. And I think that's something that a lot of people grapple with as a component of their identity. And for a lot of mothers, that's a very salient part of their identity. You know, they bring being a mother with them to the job, and that should be framed in a way to be viewed as an asset and not as a deficit. Teresa can frame this as, you know, really being good at time management, being good at organizing, being able to multitask and care for multiple very important things at the same time. So there's a way to reframe this to where she doesn't have to be nervous that saying I'm a mother, or I took some time off to have kids, would be viewed in a negative way. And that's a really good way to bring part of her identity into a presentation on who she is. The last thing I want to bring up here is Teresa is a muralist who works with community-based organizations, and particularly those that uplift Latinx children. Again, she shouldn't shrink away from part of her identity that uplifts her roots or uplifts a part of her community. Those are all really admirable qualities, and it shows her passion, it shows her values, and it shows that the work she does. And it shows the work that she does is really important to her, whether it's on campus or outside of her 9-to-5 job. And so again, this should be framed in a way where she's able to communicate that she's willing to dedicate her time, willing to dedicate her efforts and energy to helping other people. And of course, that transfers into being a really strong leader if you are really focused on how to uplift communities and how to uplift others. It shows that she has connections to people that may not just be in her same position or in her same field, but that it's really important for her to look at the bigger picture and look at ways that she can bring her community up with her. So again, I just wanted to give a few examples of ways that you could take a look at your identity and different components of your salient identity and intersectionality and frame them in a way that really shows that your full self, the full person that you bring with you, is an asset, and that your workplace will be better for having diverse people who care about multiple different things and bring all of these different experiences. I am going to pass it on to Diana now, who will actually take this information from the pre-read and her expertise and show you how to really craft a meaningful story.
Hi there. Thank you, Brandy. Where I want to focus first is to have everyone think about, how you've become successful in your career. So the subject matter that propels you forward in either being a faculty member or being an expert in admissions or career development, whatever it may be, that subject matter expertise is really what helps you to be successful in your career. So what's interesting is that we spend a lot of time thinking about those subject matter areas because that's where we want to take our career. But where we tend to not focus a lot of our effort is to think about ourselves and really become an expert in ourselves. And I'm going to give you a real example. So I was working with an interim dean and at a Research One institution, and he was applying for the full-time deanship. So what he shared with me was that he wasn't good at talking about himself and that his experience never resonated with larger groups of people. And so as we got to know each other better and I heard more about his teaching, he was a faculty member in statistics, and he had actually won several awards for his teaching. And what I learned about him is that he had a deep passion for statistics and was able to make the subject matter very compelling for his students. So he had a very popular class, and he always felt confident in front of the class when he was talking about statistics. And the reason is because he had a passion in the subject, and also he spent a lot of time identifying ways to make statistics compelling to his audience. So we used that kind of storyline to do a deep dive into his background, and I challenged him to become an expert in him and to be able to share his passion and align his background with why he would be a good fit for a dean. So when we think about this, what you want to do is really prepare and think about your background in very reflective ways to root out the areas that are going to be important to align with whichever position that you're applying for. So in this example, in creating an introduction, we're actually going to focus on Teresa Sanchez and applying for a position as a department head. So the first thing that we would want to recommend that she do is to reflect on her experiences that align with the position she's being interviewed for. And so for Teresa, that would be her passion for higher education, leadership, and student success. And if you refer to Teresa's story, When you look at the passion for higher education, she has spent a great deal of time there. She spent time as an undergraduate and a graduate student. She's worked there as a researcher and also as an instructor. And then she's also worked as a leader in her community-based organization as well. And so these are areas that are, all aligning with the career themes that she's selecting here. So passion for higher education, leadership, and student success. The other important aspect is to consider, when you're considering your experiences, to categorize them in discrete areas so that you can construct a foundation of themes that you can build your entire introduction around. So again, for Teresa, we've selected 3. These are passion for higher education, leadership, and student success. And the example that is in the pre-read, just for this one section for her career themes is, I've had 3 overarching themes in my career. These are a passion for higher education, an eagerness to lead with intention, and the desire to guide young people on the path to their future. And so again, this foundational aspect of her introduction, which is the career theme, aligns with the position of department head. So let's go ahead and move forward a slide, Brandy. And then the second element of constructing a thoughtful and compelling introduction would be to think about your past experience. And so in your past experience, the goal is to not give a shopping list of all the experiences that you bring to the table, but to be very strategic about the experiences that you want to bring forward. So you want to bring forward, again, aligning the experiences that align with your career themes that ultimately align back to the position. So with the department head being the position, the career highlights would be teaching, research, and administration. And so to be able to identify which experiences fit into these three categories, I would recommend that you do a little mind mapping and take each of these areas and begin to kind of brainstorm some of your experiences that would align with teaching, that would align with research, that would align with administration. And so for Teresa, she has taught in marine biology. She has conducted research in marine biology and specifically in coral reef preservation. And she's also managed some budget. Now, her management of budget has not necessarily been traditional in an administrative position, but it's a significant amount of money that she has managed, $100,000 in various grants that she has either led or been a part of in marine biology. So all of these roles, all of these administrative type roles are really transferable to becoming a department head and managing the administrative function that goes with that role. So her career highlights and what she's focused on in this section are really her teaching experience, research, and administration. So I'm going to take a minute to read this. And of course, normally you would not be reading this, but I think it's important just for all of us to be on the same page about this. So over the last 15 years, I've invested my time in teaching and contributing to and leading research projects focused on coral reef preservation. While deep in research mode, I have led and collaborated with other researchers to win $100,000 in various grants for marine biology. My role in these grants has been varied. I've served as financial manager, resource acquisition lead, and I've contributed to the research as a PI and collaborator. So again, this segment of the introduction really brings together what the past experience Teresa brings to the table that aligns well with the department head position. Okay, Brandy, if you could move forward to the next slide. The next aspect of constructing an introduction would be to evaluate your present experience. And again, once again, connecting your present experience to the themes. And I always recommend continuing on the brainstorming path. What are the current experiences that I have in my current role that will connect well with the themes, thus connecting well to the role that I'm applying for. And so for Teresa, she came up with this, which is for the last 5 years, I have taught both grad and undergrad courses in marine biology. I've served on department committees focused on strategic planning and represented my department on the campus-wide DEI committee. In the last 2 years, I've collaborated with other faculty in my department to mentor incoming first-generation freshmen to improve retention and academic success. Concurrently to my academic career, I am a community muralist. I've supported a community-based organization to inspire neighborhood youth to invest in their communities through artistic endeavors and building community gardens. So what's important about how she has constructed her present experience is that she's included this experience as a community muralist and working with the community and helping youth to become inspired and community oriented. And again, this is taking her asset-minded, identity-based experiences and including them so that this is her authentic self. She's showing up as her authentic self, and she should be confident about bringing this experience forward because it is really about, you know, when you're a department head, you have to consider all of the stakeholders that you manage or that you come into contact with. There are students, there are faculty, there are cross-campus representatives, and there are folks outside of the institution that are all part of who the department chair would come into contact with and who they represent. So, and again, in thinking about the high level, we look at the orange highlighted aspects of this present introduction, and we can see that, you know, there's education, there's her background in teaching here, which is the grad and undergrad courses. There's her experience working in cross-campus committees that do represent areas that she's passionate about, the strategic planning, having vision and strategy that's connected to campus, and then also representing her department on campus-wide DEI committees. So that's, you know, giving her a broad purview into the operations of universities and how decisions are made collectively across campus. And then mentoring incoming first-generation freshmen to improve retention and academic success. A large part of what her new role would be is to make sure that that incoming freshmen are not left behind and that they are seen and heard and supported in their entree into education. And that connects as well to how she has continued to contribute to her community in working with youth to feel as part of a community. So again, all of this contributes to how her themes play out and connect to the role of department head. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward. So the next piece of this is really connecting your story to your future. So an important part of developing your introduction, it's really to answer the first question that you're asked in an interview. And that question can vary. So the question could be, tell me about yourself. The question could be, why does this position interest you? And so those two questions are both invitations to provide a brief introduction about your background and connect it to why you're interested in the current position and where you see yourself in the future. And so this whole aspect is about synthesizing the themes, the past and the present, and where you see yourself in the future. And so with Teresa, this is where how she has synthesized the past, present, and future. My background in research, teaching, and representing my department in integral committees informs my desire to make a difference in the future of this institution. As the department head, I would be an inclusive leader who reinforces the importance of multiplicity of experiences to better support students, researchers, and faculties of all backgrounds. So again, you can see in this how she has actually pulled out the themes of that she identified at the beginning of this process, connected them to her past, brought them to the present, and then is pulling them through to the future. Okay, can you move this forward, please? All right, so when you're doing your introduction in an interview, and this could be in a screening interview, this could be in a second interview where perhaps there are more than a couple of people in the room. It can be how you're interviewing, when you're interviewing on campus, if you're interviewing for a leadership position and it's a panel interview. Your compelling story should never take more than 2 minutes. They have your resume in front of you. They probably have prepared questions for you about your background. So this is your opportunity to demonstrate your communication skills and be able to tell your compelling story in a short period of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 minutes, and I'm actually going to do what you should never do in an interview, which is read your introduction. But I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to try to make it a little bit conversational. And with this interview, with this introduction, this is just an example of how you would begin to construct it. And my recommendation would be that you take this interview or you take this introduction, and then you synthesize it down to bullets as you become more comfortable saying it out loud and really internalizing the 3 themes, what you're highlighting about your past, how you bring that to your present, and then how that all aligns to where you see yourself. So initially, it's going to be a little clunky. It's going to sound red, like what I'm going to be doing right now. But ultimately, you want to synthesize it down to a couple of bullets and maybe just a couple of words that actually help you to remember your story and to make it compelling every time. So if you'd like to time me, feel free to do so. And I'm going to start my 2-minute introduction. So the question is, Teresa, please tell us about yourself and why you're interested in this position. Thank you very much. I'd like to start with providing the three overarching themes in my career. These are a passion for higher education, an eagerness to lead with intention, and the desire to guide young people on the path to their future. Over the last 15 years, I've invested my time in teaching and contributing to and leading research projects focused on coral reef preservation. While deep in research mode, I've led and collaborated with other researchers to win $100,000 in various grants for marine biology. My role in these grants has been varied. I've served as a financial manager, resource acquisition lead, and I've contributed to the research as a PI and collaborator. For the last 5 years, I've taught both grad and undergraduate courses in marine biology. I've served on department committees focused on strategic planning, and I've represented my department on campus-wide DEI committees. In the last 2 years, I've also collaborated with other faculty in my department to mentor incoming first-generation freshmen to improve retention and academic success. Concurrently to my academic career, I'm a community muralist. I've supported a community-based organization to inspire neighborhood youth to invest in their communities through artistic endeavors and building community gardens. So my background in research, teaching, and representing my department in integral community committees informs my desire to make a difference in the future of this institution. So that should have probably taken about 2 minutes, maybe a little bit less. And that is the right length of time that you should speak in front of people without a break. If you're speaking more than 2 minutes, it's not really a conversation. And I always recommend to my clients that your interview process is really a conversation with you and the folks that represent the institution. It's you getting to know them better and them getting to know you better. And so it starts with you being able to share in a compelling way your story and what brings you forward as a candidate for this position. So I want to stop there. And actually, we're going to take questions in just a few minutes. But if you want to just move forward to that next slide, Brandy. I want to just briefly review this for all of you. This is also in the pre-read, but your call to action today should be to take some time to think about your personal story and to spend some time thinking about where you've been, where you are now, where you want to be, and what are the values that you would like to make sure are represented in your introduction. And also begin to think about what the key priorities have been in your background that are going to help position you for the desired role you hope to achieve in the future. It also helps you to begin to capture and think about capturing these elements that are so important in telling your story and sharing your experiences more broadly as you respond to different questions. So again, take the time to think about your personal story. What are the compelling elements of it? And can you tell it in 2 minutes or less? All right, so let's go ahead and open it up for questions.
So Diana, we have a couple questions around career themes. The first question is around, are there some exercises that you would recommend to help people identify what their 3 career themes are?
Yes, so I think the first thing to do is to not look at your resume. Throw that out, because what happens is that, in my experience, when you start by looking at your resume, you are constrained by what you see on your resume. And so I really advise you to think more broadly about what your experiences are in your current role. And, you know, again, just brainstorm. You're not writing it for anyone else except for you. So just make a bulleted list and set a timer for 90 seconds. What are the top experiences that I deem successful in my current role? And so, you know, start there. And then thinking about your past, what are the experiences that I've had that are important to helping me get the next position that I want? And then also thinking about probably the most important question is, where do I see myself in 3 years? Where do I see myself in my next role? And if you start there, you can start thinking about, okay, if I want to be a department chair, what are the types of department conditions that exist are going to be something that I'm going to be interested in working through. You know, so if I'm interested in working with a department that is going through a lot of change, then that's going to be something that excites me. My 3 themes are going to be different than someone else who's looking for a department chairship that is all about kind of continuing along the same path with the current programs. So when you are able to identify where you're headed, I believe that that's going to be an easier path for you to think about, okay, if I'm headed here, what are the 3 ideas about my career that have been in my past and in my present that are going to help me to get there?
And Diana,
Thank you. Go for it, Mary Beth.
I was just going to say, I think you answered the second question because folks were asking about whether you should start with a target role and work backwards or vice versa. So
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Wilman, you were probably going to hit the next question for Brandy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to actually, the next question is for someone, I'm going to toss it to the panel and anyone can answer this. This person is asking about advice to recent graduates on developing a strong story and introduction when one does not have as many work experiences as someone like Teresa, who we had in our example.
I'll start on that because I think actually it's a great question, and it doesn't just pertain to someone who's starting out in their career, because I think everybody faces that moment when they look at a job description and see a bulleted list of responsibilities or experiences being desired and starts to wonder, well, what if I don't have all of them? Should I still apply? And the answer is usually yes, as long as you're being realistic with yourself, because I think the question you should be asking is, not literally have I had that experience, but what is that experience really, what are they really looking for? You know, so maybe I haven't run a large project, but did I get together a set of volunteers to accomplish an objective for a student activity that I was part of? Or maybe I've never managed people, but I did have to get a series of colleagues in a performance group that I was part of, or an athletic team that I competed on, to all agree to a shared sense of mission and vision, and kind of describe describe that. That's equally valid experience that you've had that prepares you for a position. And similar to someone who, is maybe a little bit further in their career, but hasn't managed people yet, but has led teams. I mean, you have to think about not necessarily just what literally they're asking for in the job description, but what skills that represents, and then think about your own experiences and kind of start to describe the ones that you've had that are very closely related to that. So, a student that's done research, a student that's had a student employee's job, a student that's led some student activities, think about how you can describe those experiences and now in the context of how that helps you perform that first job that you're applying for. So that would be my take on it. I know other panelists may have a different perspective.
That's great.
I have another question. I think Brandy, you might have some good insight into this. The question is around getting positions in leadership positions in organizations focused on diversity. So the question is that it seems like most universities are looking to hire ethnic Blacks and Latinx in leadership, since they typically represent the underrepresented student population. As an Asian American, how would you present yourself to highlight yourself as a diverse candidate while representing a majority student population?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think that what I would focus on for this person is highlighting ways that your background makes you really good at including everybody when you're leading. If you're creating programs, talk about ways that having different experiences or having this diverse background makes you an ally to marginalized groups. You might want to pull on examples where you've led committees that not only had majority people represented, but had underserved or minoritized people represented, and things that you did to pull those people into whatever activity or program to where they were seen, that they were heard, that they were supported. So I wouldn't necessarily, and again, this isn't just for people of color or for people with a specific type of identity, but really about a way that you bring experiences that aren't necessarily the typical or the norm or cookie cutter with you into the workplace, that can be framed in a way that shows how you're able to contribute to multiple communities, uplift different voices and that sort of thing. So even if this person is an Asian American person, I would definitely make sure that you highlight how different experiences you've had, whether it was related to your identity or just part of your passions and your values, helps you support other communities. And I think that's a really good way to frame it.
Thanks, Brandy.
That's really insightful. That's really insightful. I got a question here. Brandy, earlier in our presentation, you had mentioned this idea of intersectionality. You start to tease out some ideas around gender, right? I have a really interesting question here. This person writes, an area that has never been discussed is not stigmatizing women whose circumstances resulted in not being moms. They write, we've had to make huge sacrifices in our personal life for our careers. We continually get stigmatized by both sides, as women, as minorities, in non-traditional roles. I guess the question here is, what does it look like to navigate, I guess, that stigmatization? What advice do we have to navigate that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think in a larger sense, I think the takeaway here is to really guard against biases and stigmatizing anybody's particular experience, right? Everybody, the sum of your experiences that you've lived throughout your life brings you to who you are and what you're doing in this current moment. And so we really want to shy away from stigmatizing anything or anybody's experiences. So in the example here, if there's a woman who is not a mother and she's feeling stigma because, perhaps people are asking her about that or questioning it, I would go back to looking at the parts of your identity that are most important and salient as it relates to this topic, and being able just to frame your experience and say, for whatever reason, and you can choose to share as much or as little as you'd like to about why you've decided not to have children or why you don't have children. But I would focus on framing the positive of your experience and framing what you can bring if we're in the situation where you're in a job interview or maybe in a workplace setting. just make sure that you're reinforcing the parts of your background and your identity that really hold value, and push back if somebody is trying to frame you in a way that makes it seem like you haven't accomplished or achieved something that they have decided you should achieve because you're a woman at a certain age, that people feel like you should have had children, or that you should have chosen a different path. Just make sure that you reinforce your values and what you really bring to the table, and push back, anybody else trying to put you in a box, and say, hey, this is who I am. I'm really proud of it. I've worked really, really hard to get where I am. And, these are the things that you should be valuing about me.
Thanks, Brandy.
That's really good. Thank you.
Diana, I think this is a question for you. Are there any particular advice or strategies for current leaders interested in making a change to a different role in higher education?
So I think where you need to begin is to think about, I always like the question, where do I see myself in 3 years? And then backing up, from there, and thinking about, all right, if I want to be, if I'm in technology as an example, but I want to work in the academic area, what's a feasible path for me to get there? And so when you're exploring what the path would be, you can kind of backtrack from 3 years out to the current to identify how you get there. And so I think the first step in doing that is to really reach out to a network of people, establish one if you don't have one, and try to connect with people that are doing the job that you want to do, and just simply conduct an information interview, make it conversational, have coffee with some folks that are maybe on your campus. I know we can't do that now, but you can certainly schedule a 15-minute coffee chat with someone, and just kind of check in and ask them how it's going for them, and to just ask questions about their career path. And I think what tends to happen is that when I've worked with some folks is that they are afraid to reach out to people because they're afraid someone's going to say no. And the truth is there are going to be people that say no, but you just have to kind of persevere, and it's not personal. It's generally not personal when someone says no to having a meeting with you. So just reach out to someone else. So you want to get all the information you can about what it would take to pivot to another position, and then begin to think about how you're going to either craft your current experience in a best case scenario for getting that position, or moving into that position, or identify what the gaps in your background are, and decide what your path is to make sure that you are able to build those competency areas.
That is really good. I have a question about how, they've crafted a wonderful introduction. They worked really hard. They used our worksheet and they followed everything to the T. However, they get into the interview and the interviewers don't ask the question, tell me about yourself, right? They want to know, how does one flow smoothly or incorporate that introduction smoothly when that direct question isn't posed? How does one incorporate their story into the interview?
Well, I think, it's interesting because usually when you're at the beginning, they're going to ask you about your specific experiences. And, generally there's going to be some questions about past experiences on your resume that are going to be aligned with a new position. Or they might, someone might ask a question, tell me more about your experience here with this program development change. You had to work with faculty, you had to work with administration. What were the pitfalls of this process? What were the successes? Tell us about it in total. And so, that could lend itself to you being able to incorporate some of the experiences that you had prepared at a high level, the themes that you're good at, that you want to represent in this interview process, that align you to the role. So it could be, this is an example of how I leverage my my passion for higher education and my ability to engage deeply with faculty to help move our department forward in developing programs that are meaningful to our student population. And so again, there are ways to integrate it in, but the key is to really be an expert in yourself. You really have to analyze your experiences and know and prepare your success stories in advance of your interview to be able to talk and make a compelling case for yourself during the interview process. If you don't have a detailed understanding of what the context is for your stories, what the actions were that you took to be successful in this particular scenario, and then what the actual results were, you're going to be really hard pressed to make the case for hiring you for the position.
That's great. I like that answer. I'm going to toss it. Mary Beth, we'll do one more question and then we'll close out. We're getting a lot of good questions here. And just FYI, this was meant to be somewhat of an introductory. I think, there is so much more about this topic that we could explore. And, I don't know about you, Mary Beth, but I'm getting a lot of good questions. So that tells me that we've got to, dive a little bit deeper for our next engagement.
Yeah, I think we could probably analyze those questions to create the content for our next webinar.
Absolutely.
I don't know if if you want to give 30 seconds, Diana, or anyone on the panel. Maybe let's see some last question. What advice do you give professionals who wear multiple hats? First, for instance, being in the relationship coaching space as well as academia, being a researcher and having a doctorate in coaching, and that adds prestige. However, not so much in the other direction, like coaching into academia into coaching. I don't know if you've got a 30 seconds elevator speech or 30 seconds of airspace to give people some advice in that category.
I guess what I would say, I don't know if this is necessarily advice, but if you're wearing multiple hats, is that really where you want to be? And if it is where you want to be, you should be showing up with confidence. You should feel that you're showing up authentically every day, and people around you should be feeling that too. And so if you're wearing multiple hats, that can be a positive or a negative. And you just have to think about on the inside and reflect about whether or not this is a place that brings you happiness and joy.
Let's see here. I want to just look for one more question. I think a lot of our questions, I want to be mindful of folks' time today. Yeah, I think this will be a good question to consider as we turn towards closing out. Someone asked, how do you handle the gaps in education or work if the time was not spent productively or in ways that may be looked down upon? Any advice there?
I have a quick, my quick reaction is just to be honest. I mean, I think if you took, and what's non-productive? I mean, that's all a matter of perspective too. If you took 2 years off to travel, I think that's pretty good. That's productive. I mean, you went to expand your horizons, you experienced different parts of the world, you met different people. If you took a job that wasn't something that panned out for you, is that really non-productive? No, I don't think it's non-productive. I think you learned something about yourself in terms of what you like and what you don't like about the type of work that you do. So I think you have to change your frame of mind and what you might be perceived to be non-productive. I think you have to reflect on that time spent and what you learned from it, what you learned about yourself and what you like to do and what you don't like to do.
I like that. Well, any other last bits of insight or gems as we look to close out the webinar here from the panel for reflections?
I guess the one thing that I would say in summary about your introduction is that it's meant to whet the appetite of your interviewers. and so that they want to know more about you. And so always think that, keep that in mind when you're developing your introduction, that it's meant to whet the appetite. It's not meant to be Thanksgiving dinner.
I like that approach. I just want to say, yeah, this has been great. I really have learned a lot. It's been, there have been some really good insights brought up. There are also folks who have been asking questions, more structural equity questions. And I want to say, we certainly do appreciate those questions, and we do look to engage those questions. And perhaps we'll do so at a future event. We will dive a bit deeper into those equity questions and some of those structural elements around introduction, structural elements around navigating, disclosing certain parts of one's identity given systemic structural barriers. Yeah, I think there's a lot for us there. So we'll have to revisit that, and we'll let you know when that engagement will occur, because I think there's some really good substantive things that can be learned from our panel here, and also from our audience. This has been great. This has really been great. I want to turn it over to the Next Gen team if they have any final thing that they want to say, and we'll look towards closing out.
Well, I would just say on behalf of my colleagues, thank you. It's a pleasure for us to be part of this. The mission of the Race and Equity Center and PRISM is vitally important to higher education and to our country, really. And we just want to make whatever contribution we can. So thank you for having us, and we hope we can come back again.
Absolutely. And on behalf of the USC Race and Equity Center and PRISM, we certainly do thank you for joining us this afternoon. It has been a pleasure to engage with you all. I did have folks asking about the slides. Yes, slides will be sent out. We're going to do a quick edit. The worksheet, we'll send out links to the worksheet, the pre-read worksheet. Hopefully that you'll find that helpful. In addition, we'll also edit the video or the recording of this webinar and make sure that's available. And last but not least, we'll also be sending out a survey not too long after we end this engagement. So make sure to fill that out. We want your feedback, and we want to continue to engage with you. All right. Again, thank you so very much. And that is all. Have a good afternoon or day or evening.
Bye, everyone.